The Young and the Restless spoilers shock, in the quiet hours before dawn, while the rest of the world still dozed in oblivious anticipation, Lily Winters stood by the window of her suite, gazing out at the ink-black skyline. The invitation lay open on the table behind her, its elegant script gleaming under the warm glow of a lamp, and yet something about it chilled her to the core. Her instincts, fine-tuned through years of navigating corporate chaos, family betrayal, and grief, screamed that this was no ordinary event. Aristotle Dumas, the elusive figure whose name had begun to swirl like smoke through every corridor of power in Genoa City, had sent a personal invitation to her. A special guest, the message said. But Lily knew better than to accept that at face value. In this world, being singled out rarely meant you were favored, it usually meant you were being targeted. While Nick Newman, Billy Abbott, Kyle Abbott, Audra Charles, and even Victor Newman treated the upcoming event in Paris as a thrilling spectacle, an elite gathering hosted by a man they barely understood, Lily remained haunted by a sense of invisible danger, a ticking clock she alone could hear. They joked about unmasking Dumas, about the luxury and extravagance he would surely provide. Audra spoke of priceless connections and whispered alliances. Billy, always chasing adrenaline, was practically giddy at the idea of unraveling a mystery. Victor, ever the tactician, saw it as an opportunity to finally corner the man he had long suspected of orchestrating half the recent chaos in the business world. But Lily? She could not sleep. Not after what she had uncovered. It began days earlier, after she received the invitation. Something about the phrasing of the letter nagged at her. The tone was too specific, the language oddly curated, as though it was meant not to flatter but to test her. She ran the embossed wax seal through a scanner at her office, hoping to find nothing. But the data embedded in the seal shocked her, coordinates. Not for the venue in Paris as expected, but for a now-defunct weapons testing facility outside Marseille. Cross-referencing with a private investigator she had used years ago, she discovered the site had once been blacklisted by several European governments. It had ties to shell corporations connected to none other than Dumas himself, companies long thought dismantled or erased. It was a ghost footprint, faint and long buried, but real. The pieces began to fall into place. She accessed archived blueprints of the facility. What she found wasn't a ballroom, but a labyrinth of tunnels, surveillance chambers, and secured rooms, many of them lined with fail-safe gas release valves. Panic rose in her chest. This wasn't a party, it was a trap. A calculated gathering of every rival, every threat, every curious observer. He wasn't just luring them in for entertainment or diplomacy. He was assembling them for containment. For elimination. Still, part of her hesitated. Perhaps she was wrong. Perhaps her grief over Neil, her anger over recent betrayals, had made her paranoid. But then she received a second envelope. No name, no address, just the same wax seal. Inside was a single photo, an aerial image of the private jet she and the others would board to reach Paris. On the wing, someone had marked it with a red X. And on the back of the photo, scribbled in barely legible ink, "You are not his guest. You are his message." Lily knew she had no choice. She arranged a meeting under the pretense of sharing travel details with the group. Nick arrived first, flanked by his usual calm charisma. Billy strolled in soon after, amused by Lily's sudden sense of urgency. Kyle brought his usual mix of skepticism and ambition, while Audra remained cool, elegant, and unreadable. Victor, of course, came last, suspicious even before she spoke. Once seated, Lily closed the door behind them and dropped the photo on the table like a gauntlet. "This isn't a party," she said, her voice hard. "It's a staging ground. We're not the audience. We're the targets." They stared at the image in silence. Victor leaned forward, examining the markings with a frown. Nick's expression darkened. Audra's mask of control flickered, replaced by an edge of concern. Kyle looked stunned, the air knocked out of him. Billy simply muttered, "No way," but he didn't sound convinced. Lily pulled up the files she had compiled. The facility data, the security logs, the shell companies. Every thread tied back to Dumas. He's not inviting us to negotiate, she continued. He's luring us into a trap. I believe he plans to keep us isolated, monitored, maybe even used as leverage. If we board that plane, we may never land in Paris. And if we do, it won't be to clink champagne glasses. It will be to walk into a carefully designed prison. The room exploded with questions, disbelief, fear masked as anger. Victor stood, fists clenched, conflicted between his thirst for confrontation and the realization that Lily's warning might be the only thing standing between them and annihilation. He didn't want to believe it. He wanted this to be the final play, the final showdown where he would tear the mask off Aristotle Dumas and show the world the man who dared challenge him. But Victor Newman hadn't survived this long by ignoring signs, and Lily's evidence was too complete, too precise to be dismissed. Nick was the first to act. We're canceling the flight, he said, grabbing his phone. No one's boarding that jet. Billy, face pale, nodded in agreement. We can't take the risk. He's insane. Kyle looked at Lily with renewed respect. How did you even find all this? She shrugged, exhausted. Because I listened to my gut, and for once, I didn't ignore it. Audra stared out the window, arms crossed. If this is true, she said coldly, then Dumas just tried to assassinate half of Genoa City's power structure in one stroke. Her voice dropped. That's not war. That's terrorism. Victor remained by the table, silent, his fingers still brushing the photo. 1,000 strategies formed and dissolved in his mind. He knew now that he couldn't face Dumas on the man's terms, not yet. But he also understood something chilling. Dumas hadn't just built a trap. He had built a message. The maze, the invitations, the illusion of grandeur, they were all designed to send a signal to the rest of the world. I can dismantle your kings while you're toasting their crowns. And yet, because of Lily, the message would not be delivered. The jet was grounded. Authorities were alerted. The press remained oblivious. But Dumas, wherever he was, would soon realize that his grand unveiling had failed. Or perhaps he already knew. Perhaps he had predicted Lily's intervention. Perhaps this too was part of the game. Later that night, as Lily walked alone through Chancellor Park, she found no peace in having stopped a catastrophe. Only a deeper unease. Because now she knew that Dumas didn't just want to destroy them, he wanted to make them destroy themselves. And he had only just begun. Lily's revelation hit like thunder in the cramped cabin, the echo of her own words ricocheting off the fuselage walls. Aristotle Dumas had rigged the plane to become a tomb for every last soul on board. She could see the color drain from Victor's face, his eyes widening as the gravity of her confession settled over him like a shroud. You heard me, she insisted, voice low and urgent. He wants us all dead. Victor would go first, but the trigger won't be his hand. Kane Ashby will press that button, and Dumas will watch us die from afar, his mask unlifted, his face hidden behind every act of betrayal. For a heartbeat no one spoke, the hum of engines beneath them suddenly a predator's growl. Then panic exploded. Nick vaulted over a row of seats, fists pounding the cockpit door. Billy scrambled, toppling a stack of magazines as he raced toward the rear cabin. Audra shouted for calm even as her own voice cracked. Kyle fumbled with his phone to try and call someone, anyone, who could help. Victor, however, remained rooted, torn between disbelief and the desperate need to act. In that instant, a distant chime reminded them of the approaching deadline, the coded message Lily had intercepted only hours before, hidden in an innocuous email from Dumas's assistant. Lily had known about the bomb because of a single slip in Carter's carefully constructed communications, a fragment of metadata embedded in a photo that, when she traced its origin, pointed to a clandestine compartment built beneath the cabin floor. While everyone else reveled in the promise of luxury travel, Lily had examined the jet's maintenance records and cross-referenced them with a confidential report she'd obtained through an old contact at Newman Enterprises' security division. The report detailed recent, unauthorized modifications to the plane's understructure, reinforced subfloor panels that concealed a rectangular device roughly the size of a suitcase. She had pressed Victor to authorize a discreet inspection, but he had refused, blinded by the prospect of confronting Dumas on his own terms. Only when she commandeered a maintenance engineer, convincing him that Victor suspected sabotage, did the truth emerge: a timer affixed to the explosive, designed to detonate at exactly 30 minutes after takeoff, would level the aircraft and leave no survivors. Now, as the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, Lily led them to the narrowed aisle in front of the galley, where the floor panel lay deceptively smooth. The ticking of the hidden timer sounded no louder than the blood in their ears, but Lily felt it in every fiber of her being. "We have to pry this open," she said, hands trembling but resolute. Audra produced a pocketknife. Kyle found a screwdriver in one of the maintenance bays he had unlocked with a stolen keycard. Billy and Nick helped wedge the panel's edges free. All the while, Victor barked orders, half out of panic, half out of the old instinct to command. He leaned over Lily's shoulder and demanded, "Where is it? Point it out." With a nod, she reached beneath the lifted edge and felt the cool metal of the device, a rectangular block with wires trailing into the fuselage's belly, the timer's LCD display counting down mercilessly. 9 minutes remained. His jaw clenched. Victor looked at her, the fatherly pride and the regret mingling in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, voice catching. "I shouldn't have doubted you." She shook her head, focusing on the task. They had only seconds to decide: attempt to disarm the bomb, or divert it from the cabin entirely. Kane Ashby, unbeknownst to them, the reluctant pawn in Dumas's scheme, stood just behind, expression taut with conflicting loyalties. Dumas had twisted Kane's desperation to reclaim his own legacy into a blackmail gambit. Either Kane would ignite the device remotely, or Dumas would expose secrets that would destroy everything Kane held dear. As Lily leveled her gaze at him, the pressure of the situation forced his hand. His finger hovered over the activation switch, sweat beading on his brow as he stared at her. He had no choice but to obey. Victor lunged, wrestling for control of Kane's wrist. Kane faltered, the weaponized guilt and fear coursing through his veins. In that instant, Lily acted, ripping the wires free. She severed the fragile link between button and bomb. The timer flashed an error code, freezing at 3 seconds. Then came the shudder, a disconnect alarm, the whine of metal conduits failing, and the cold click of mechanisms locking into permanent dormancy. Kane collapsed, relief and shame washing over him in equal measure, while Billy and Kyle braced themselves against the shaking floor. The bomb lay inert, its threat neutralized, but the echo of what might have been lingered like a phantom's scream. Lily knelt beside the device, hands stained with sweat and dirt, her heart pounding in a rhythm that matched the cacophony of ragged breaths around her. Audra reached over and grasped her arm, eyes shining with gratitude. "You saved us," she whispered, voice thick. Lily looked up, tears brimming, and nodded. Above them, the cabin lights flickered as if in tribute to the lives spared by the slimmest of margins. Victor stood and looked down at Lily, chest heaving, and offered her a hand. When she took it, the solidarity between them felt like a promise, that even in the face of Dumas's most brutal designs, they could find salvation in trust and unity. Kane watched from the side, guilt etched on his face as he realized the depth of his betrayal, and perhaps, for the first time, the possibility of redemption. Outside the windows, clouds drifted peacefully, oblivious to the calamity that had almost claimed them. Inside, the group gathered around the disarmed device, breathing deeply as the noise of panic gave way to the quiet aftershock of survival. They would not disembark in Paris that night. They would confront Dumas on their own terms. Better prepared, more united, and determined to expose the monster who puppeteered their lives. And Lily Winters, whose intuition had turned the tide, would stand at the forefront, a beacon of defiance against the darkness he sought to unleash. ChatGPT DNOI, Daniel sat alone on the rooftop terrace of crimson lights, the late afternoon sun casting soft shadows across his face as he gently strummed the strings of his guitar. The melody was light and reflective, the kind that came from a place between healing and hesitation. He was only half present in the moment, his thoughts drifting somewhere between memory and reconstruction, trying to find steady footing in a world that hadn't stopped spinning even after everything in his life had collapsed. Music had always been his anchor, and today, the familiar strings beneath his fingertips gave him a sense of quiet he hadn't felt in weeks. But that quiet was suddenly interrupted when, out of the corner of his eye, he saw two familiar figures step out onto the terrace, his father, Danny Romalotti, and Christine Cricket Blair. His fingers froze mid-chord. "Dad," he asked, blinking like he wasn't sure if it was real. He hadn't expected to see them, hadn't been warned, hadn't prepared himself. But there they were, smiling as though their presence was the most natural thing in the world. Christine waved, and Danny chuckled, clearly pleased by the genuine surprise on his son's face. "We wanted it to be a surprise," Danny said warmly, stepping forward. Daniel stood, setting his guitar aside and moving to embrace his father. It wasn't awkward, it was emotional, if a bit fragile, like trying to hold on to something you're still afraid of losing. As they sat down together, Daniel explained that Phyllis had actually delayed her plans to put him to work, giving him more time to ground himself before facing the pressures of a job he still wasn't sure he wanted. It was a rare kindness from his mother, and he was grateful. But this moment, right now, seeing his father, feeling that unconditional love again, was doing more for him than any structured plan could. They began to talk, slipping into conversation that felt cautious yet supportive. Danny wanted to know how his son was holding up, how he was adjusting to a reality that had been flipped upside down. Daniel admitted that things hadn't gone the way he expected. "It's not the normal I thought I'd be dealing with," he said. "But I'm trying to adjust. To be okay with the uncertainty." Danny leaned forward, sincerity in his eyes. "Whatever you need, I'm here. However I can help." Daniel nodded slowly. "I've actually had help. From Tessa. She's been incredible. She gets it. She knows how to pull me out of my head before I spiral. I don't think I'd be this far without her." He paused, then added, "When I'm ready, I'll tell you both everything. I just need to keep climbing out of it first." Danny placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "No pressure. We're just glad to be here." He added that he'd be staying in Genoa City for a while. "I think Lucy will be thrilled," Daniel said with a small smile. "It's like, having you here makes it feel like I can breathe again." But the peaceful mood shattered the moment the door to the rooftop opened once more. Phyllis walked in, Tessa a step behind her. At first, neither noticed who was already sitting there. But then Phyllis froze, her eyes locking onto Danny and Christine at the table with her son. Her entire posture changed in an instant. The warmth drained from her expression, replaced with tension and an almost visible tightening in her jaw. She hadn't expected this, and clearly didn't welcome it. "Of course," she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Tessa to hear. "He's back, and he brought her." Tessa glanced from Phyllis to the group, suddenly aware that they had walked in on something more emotionally loaded than a casual reunion. Daniel stood up quickly, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Mom," he started, but she cut him off with a look, one she had perfected over decades of drama, the one that said we'll talk later, and this is not over. Whatever peace Daniel had felt just moments earlier now hung by a thread. His father's presence had lifted the weight off his shoulders, but his mother's arrival threatened to place it back. The emotional tightrope between the people he loved was stretching thin, and he knew it would only be a matter of time before something snapped.